Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Brandon Devnich here from Pegasaas.com to give you our sort of recap of what we've been working on this week and the features and improvements in this week's, which is version 2.2.9 release of the Pegasaas Accelerator WP plugin. So this week the main focus has been, as it has been in the last couple weeks, resolving any issues with the installation routine. So we've now been in the WordPress repository for probably about 3 weeks now, and we've had lots of installations, not all of them successful, and every week we are improving on the ability to have it run successfully. Now, there's a whole slew of different reasons. It's not just one reason that the plugin maybe doesn't complete its installation. We found a major, call it a bit of an Achilles heel, so to speak, this last week, where the server was timing, or the connections to the API were timing out. So that was one of the issues that we resolved. We changed the timeout time for our request to our API from a low timeout to a little bit higher, just so that the initial connection could be done. Once the initial connection phase is done, the information's been posted to the API, then the request can be received, and then the plugin can continue on with what it needs to do. We didn't want to set the timeout too high because we also didn't want the requests through your website to cause too much of a server load on your website's end. So that was one of the things we resolved this week. One of the other installation things that we found was that the requests for optimization were being blocked by two scenarios. One was basic HTTP authentication. So what that is if you've ever seen, you've gone to a website and a little pop-up window, so to speak, asking for a username and password. It's called basic HTTP authentication. And there are situations where somebody might go and put that into their WordPress website to protect the WP admin folder or the dashboard. And when that is enabled, our API cannot communicate back to the plugin with optimized resources. So we found a way where we could detect that and then suggest instructions that you can add to that control file that's responsible for that situation, or hit a button and just allow us to try to modify that file for you. The other situation that was blocking communication from our API to the plugin was when WordFence was installed and active and protecting your website, and it was possibly blocking our API's request. So we are now detecting for that upon installation and suggesting our IP addresses for our API to put into the whitelisted IP addresses in WordFence. And so we have some instructions in the interface should it detect that situation as well. All right, and a couple other things that we've added to the interface this week. We've added a little notification if we detect that your web server is possibly running a little bit slow. So this can happen for all sorts of different reasons. Either really slow shared hosting, a lot of data in your database, or a lot of plugins, or a slow theme. Basically a lot of stuff going on in your website. And so if it detects that the dashboard itself is taking, just the plain vanilla landing page for the dashboard is taking too long to load, it'll log that, and then when you reach your Pegasaas Accelerator dashboard, it will have a little, kind of like a check engine light, so to speak, up on the dashboard that will say, hey, something's going on. You click on that, and it'll tell you it's detected that it's taken the dashboard so many seconds to load. Maybe you want to consider reducing the number of active plugins and installed plugins, possibly running an optimizer plugin on your database, or maybe even consider updating, going to faster web hosting. So we added that. The other really cool little Easter egg, so to speak, that we've added is a notification, another little icon right above the page speed score in the Pegasaas dashboard that will tell you if, and it's shaped like a little bell. So if you see that, you can click on it and it'll explain what it has detected. Now, if you run any analytics or tracking services maybe using a tag manager such as Google Tag Manager, it's going to detect that and alert you that if you are experiencing less than desirable page speed scores, it is likely due to these scripts. Now, on a desktop web browser connection, they are not going to make much impact. Desktop PCs have fast CPUs, they've got fast connection to the internet. It's on the mobile devices that this stuff really takes a lot more effort to run. Now, you might not have a lot of mobile visitors, and so the discretion is up to you whether or not you really think you need to continue to have this analytical services running on your website. They're probably there for a very good reason, but you need to understand that your mobile page speed score is critical to being found in search. So if you have a really low page speed score, and a lot of it is because of the amount of extra scripts on your site, then you really need to take a good hard look at what it is that you're running and do you really need them. So all it is an advisory that if you see that, really think about it. If your page speed score is less than desirable, maybe consider what's going on as far as those scripts. They are not scripts that can be lazy loaded. If you lazy load these scripts, it's kind of like, what's the point of even having them in your page in the first place? Like Hotjar is pretty CPU intensive. It's used to track for heat maps, find out where the users are clicking. Google Analytics, you've probably heard of that before. And so if it detects that, it's just going to throw up an advisory for you. What else have we added this week? We added a mechanism for servers that we detect have either resource limited service or resource throttled, I guess you'd call it that. Kinsta and SiteGround are two particular web hosting platforms that we do this for. If we detect that, what we do is we throttle back the rate at which we respond back, because we don't want to hit those web servers too fast. In the case of Kinsta, it's on an Nginx server that if you throw too many hits to it in a short period of time, it will freeze up the PHP handler. On the SiteGround, which actually is a really super fast platform, SiteGround hosting, it's not that it will freeze up, because it won't. I've never experienced that situation with freezing it up, but what it will do is that if you go over their allotted 2-hour limits for CPU usage, or 24-hour, it could put you into a situation where they freeze your account. So we also throttle back for those two situations. And also if we detect that your web server is returning an error because of maybe there's just been too many requests that have been sent back to it in a short period of time, then we automatically throttle back the connection. And so what we've done in these situations is that if we have either of these server environments that require us to throttle back, what we do is we set up a pickup method. So instead of the API communicating out and submitting the data back to your plugin that is installed on your website, it will the plugin will every 5 minutes go and request from our API any completed optimizations or page speed scans. So we just added that back in for the optimizations. And then one other thing that we noticed, actually there's two last things. One thing we noticed when we were just doing a little digging around is that there's a way of handling data within the WordPress system where you can store a variable in something that uses the functionality called, I think it's a get option, and then update option. When you set this, you can tell it to either auto-load or not auto-load that information when WordPress initializes. It's not an issue when you have 5 or 10 variables stored in this particular native WordPress data handling mechanism, but when you have 750 pages and there's a bunch of data for every single page, you probably don't need to have all that data loaded in every single time the interface loads. So we've now gone and changed the auto load to no from yes, which is the default. and we have found that it hasn't made any impact, any negative impact, I should say, on the load time and the responsiveness of the interface. But what it has done is reduce the memory usage, which is can be also very helpful for it responding in the future. And then the last thing is just before the cutoff wire for getting this week's patch out, we had a suggestion to add some additional information for the situation if the .htaccess file that governs the routing of URLs in your WordPress website. It's the control file that usually resides within the root folder of your website. You may not even know that it's there. We use that to put our instructions in to handle caching, as well as make sure that we leverage browser caching. I would say enabling gzip and a number of other little things. We need to have our instructions put into this file, and if we don't have adequate write permissions, we were throwing up a little alert that says, hey, we need to be able to write to this file. Can you change the permissions? Well, the instructions were very thin. Basically, it said, change the permissions. Admittedly, we could do better on that. So we added a link that says, if you don't know how to do this, click here. It takes you off to the knowledge base at Pegasaas.com, directly to an article that I just wrote on how you go about changing the permissions on that particular file. And then what we also did is we added some additional handling to attempt to change the permissions to something that would allow us to write to that file accordingly. And so this situation can happen if you have a security plugin such as iTheme Security, which changes the permissions of your system files so that malicious scripts maybe don't go and write something nasty to them. Or if you have a server environment that maybe restricts the web user, which is the person that's browsing using, say, maybe the WordPress dashboard, restricts the ability for that web user to write to files. In any case, so we've sort of covered our bases a little bit better, added some better handling of that situation, as well as some more instructions. Anyways, that's what we've been working on this week, and we're trying to get a patch out every Friday if we can. If there's a situation where we realize facepalm, we've got a critical issue, we do issue patches early on in the week if we notice something critical. Otherwise, we do try to issue these on Friday with all the new features. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Hope that's informative for you, and we'll talk to you again next time. All right, bye-bye.